Ukraine is making the first high-level ministerial visit to India ever since the Ukraine war began. It's been more than 410 days since the war has been on, and Ukraine today is urging India to play a greater role in the political dialogue to end the war, a greater dialogue to assist Ukraine. The Ukrainian Deputy Foreign Minister, Emine Dzhaparova, is in India. She caught up with CNBC-TV18 and is inviting Prime Minister Modi to visit Ukraine at an early date. Listen in to what she told CNBC-TV18 about her mission to India, the message from President Zelensky, and what India can do in terms of ending the war and playing a role with its G20 presidency.
Really excited to be in India, both professionally and personally. Personally, because I've been here many times, probably 7 times, if not more, visiting Sri Satya Sai Baba's ashram in Puttaparthi. So touching the very soil of holy India is an excitement moment for myself. And professionally, I have an important mission on behalf of Ukrainian government, of my ministry and my president, to deliver some messages about our reality, which is, as you said, the most challenging reality in the modern history, because my country is going through a global change, global reconstruction, under the most challenging wartime, because this war is not provoked. And we never wanted to have this war, because in our ancient history that counts 1,500 years, we never attacked any other country. So this neo-colonial attitude, when our neighboring country that claimed to be a brotherhood nation questions the very existence of Ukraine, did not leave us a choice to fight for the very existential issue, to survive, to revive, and to arrive to something that we would dream of. And the dream of Ukraine is to live in a democratic society, an open society where everyone can feel himself or herself secured. This is what we are striving for.
Right. What would be your message to the Indian leadership? And what is the message that you're carrying on behalf of President Zelensky?
It's very frank. It's very human. I think that India is a great country, not only physically, I mean, in terms of the global role that India is playing and will be playing to a greater extent in the nearest future, because not only economically but politically, every single dimension of Indian life is also getting much more dynamic, and we see this. We see it even in Ukraine. The presidency in G20 is an important and essential role for India. So, of course, we believe that India should be engaged and involved into Ukrainian issue to a greater extent. We are not in the position of instructing India, of course. We do respect the decisions that are taken by India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi with his 3D attitude: diplomacy, dialogue, democracy, with his message that he delivered in Samarkand that there is no era of war, and we do accept it and we do share this message. But we think that India's global role, especially with regards to the presidency in G20, with regards to the influence in the global south and sharing experience for the global south and being a leading country for the Asian, African countries, is important to also not escape discussion about Ukraine, because it might seem regional here, it might seem distant from here, but it's not. Because Ukrainian war revealed all of the flaws and drawbacks of the current architecture of security, which is broken. We are dealing with not an average country, we are dealing with the P5 country that claims to be the second largest army in the world. Instead of protecting and securing the guarantees and giving guarantees of security, we have a troublemaker that attacks the other country just for the reason that we want to live in the future that we want to live. I mean, in India, I think that everyone can sense it. You are now in the position of revealing your own identity. You know, we can see that clearly and feel it. Same is taking place in Ukraine with language, with religion issue, with identity issue, with history, because for decades, first Russian Empire, then Soviet Russia, they have been manipulating and falsificating everything that comes to Ukraine. So this period is important, and we believe, and this message is frank, that India should play a greater role globally, should play a greater role in Ukrainian issue, and we believe that the first step towards it is the intensification of political dialogue on the highest level, and this visit is the first step towards this big goal, and my president is requesting a phone conversation with Prime Minister. We are looking forward to welcome him in Kiev one day. Also, the advisor on the national security, Mr. Doval, His Excellency Doval, is also will be most welcome in Kiev, as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials, the Deputy Minister, who is expected to pay his visit for the political consultations in Kiev.
So during this visit, would you be inviting the Prime Minister in person to come and visit Kiev? Will you be inviting all these leaders to come and visit Ukraine at an early date? Are you requesting for an early visit?
We are requesting for a visit. Of course, it's always about reciprocal interest. It's always about time slots that might be discussed. First step is the phone conversation that might take place between our leaders. Second is a visit of National Security Advisor Doval, who is also entrusted by Prime Minister to coordinate the Ukrainian profile, as well as Mr. Yermak, who is the head of the Ukrainian Office of the President, also the contact point for this, let's say, construction, which I believe has a huge potential, untapped potential. And then the MFA interaction, and this visit is the first step, as I said. So let me say, by concluding your question, that the whole spectrum of all possible visits and contacts that would define a greater extent of political dynamic is of need.
Right. Is there any discussion about President Zelensky visiting India to meet the Prime Minister? Has there been any kind of invitation from the Indian side? And would President Zelensky like to do that?
President Zelensky is a president under war. He is very frank, saying his message that he doesn't have time for being diplomatic. He doesn't have time for hiding something or playing, the games. He's very straight to the point. He's very frank in his speeches, and I think that everyone in the world can see this. His vision is very clear, and it was depicted in his peace formula that was for the first time launched and vocalized in Indonesia. These 10 simple articles about the basis of any discussion or dialogue should be followed, and it's really, really important to understand that it's not only about, it's about just peace, not appeasement. I mean, we hear voices, even here in India, there are many narratives behind the war, behind the peace negotiation. So let me also follow and let me also emphasize these messages. First, there is no country who is much more interested on resolving the war than Ukraine, because the war is taking place in our territory, on our soil. Our people have been killed. Missiles have been attacking the major cities every day. Yesterday, there was yet another missile terror attack with the killing of 11-year-old girl. And it's a reality of an everyday. No one can feel secure in Ukraine. Second of all, we believe that any negotiation and peace should be based on justice, because if it's not, it will be only the prolonged way of the other scenario for, look, the Crimean lesson. I'm by myself from Crimea. I represent indigenous Crimean Tatar community, and we, by the way, share Mahatma Gandhi's Satyagraha. It's like non-resilience. This is what Crimean Tatars have been demonstrating for decades with their fight for their rights and the right to live in their homeland after Stalin's deportation in 1944, when every second Crimean Tatar died. But the Crimean lesson teaches us one simple thing. If the aggression, if the evil is not stopped, it always becomes bigger. Because remember when in 2014 President Putin invaded Ukraine, when he was asked if this was the Russian army, he refused. He said it was not the Russian army. But at the end of the day, we all understood that it was a Russian army. And then for 8 years afterwards, both Ukraine and the international community was not ready to give a proper response. We were not strong enough to give proper response to Russia. International community appeased Putin, was trying to appease Putin, but then look where we all now. We are fighting the biggest war in Europe. So I think that now it's crucial to understand for everyone, as well as to India, that this war should be resolved, and it is of interest of everyone. It's not a regional thing, because the repercussions of the war you can feel even here with the food crisis, with the prices for food, with the prices for energy, and it's also an outcome of this war. So to conclude, I think that the message of the need to be involved in a greater extent into the resolution of the war on fair and just principles is important. And the vision of President Zelensky is clear in his peace formula, and this is what we think India might also consider, analyze, and share. And especially with regards to the events of the G20, we expect that India would be inviting Ukrainian officials to participate in the G20 events, for example, on the parliament level, or on the leaders level, or on the ministers level. I think it's important
to invite President
Zelensky for the G20 in September.
Right. That is an important message, Minister. I would also like to ask you, is there disappointment? Are you disappointed with the stand that India has taken over the last 1 year with regard to the war? Our trade, especially our energy trade with Russia, has significantly gone up on a month-on-month basis ever since the war began. Is there some amount of disappointment? We're also a country which is very closely linked with Russia when it comes to military technology and weapons.
Yeah, it's not about disappointment. Look, it's about being pragmatic. My message is that even though we understand that there was a past track record of relationship between India and Soviet Union, which was unique in a way, but let us do not monopolize. When we speak about Soviet Union, there is a heritage of Ukraine in that track record. Second of all, we think that diversification of everything is important, be it energy resources, because or the military supply. It's important because what our war has revealed is that the modern war, the conventional war, is not only the war, and it's not the war of Soviet technology. It's a war of a modern technology, which is West-produced technology. It's the war of drones. It's the war of artillery systems. And I think that it's crucial to follow better technologies, not those Soviet technologies that are destroyed just in one shot by one artillery attack. We've seen what the Soviet tanks have been turned into ashes by drones, by missiles, by artillery in Ukraine. So I think that if we rely on Soviet technology, it will never make any country sufficient in any war that might happen in the future. So diversification is important.
Right. About Ukrainian children, we have been reading reports that children are coming back from Russia. What has been the condition of those children, the stories that have come from them? How many children are still caught up in Russia?
It's a huge question. Look, because Ukraine officially has an access only to those controlled territories by the Ukrainian government or the occupied territories. Since the full-fledged invasion, now we used to have 20% of Ukrainian territory under occupation. We deoccupied like a bit less than half of those territories, so we pushed the Russian army back. And then what we reveal on the deoccupied territories is of shock for any human being when we see how they torture to death civilians for nothing. And of course, children and deportation, and forcible deportation of mothers and children, separation of families, and then Ukrainian orphans to the Russian orphanages. It's a war crime. It's not yet clear what is the exact number. We have approximately like a bit more than 16,000 verified cases, but I think this number is unfortunately much bigger because we don't know what happened actually on the occupied territories. But what we have from Russian officials, when they actually on the national level propagate this, let's say, conversion into the Russian nationality, which is a war crime, by the way, by the international law, is yet another demonstration of their cynical attitude towards Ukraine. Children is the most sacred. We understand that it's also a source for other crimes like organ trafficking or prostitution, and of course for us it's a matter of super great concern, and my president and as well as all Ukrainian leadership has been knocking every possible door to bring our children back. But it's a hard question, it's a difficult question, because international organizations who have a mandate to deal with this issue do not have an access to these filtration camps, as they call it. We don't know what's actually happening with this children. We might only guess. We have some cases, which are awful cases, and we think that the scope of this tragedy is much bigger than we now are able to grasp it.
All right, so that was the Ukrainian Deputy Foreign Minister telling CNBC-TV18 that she hopes India will play a greater role, a greater political role with Ukraine in the war, and possibly invite President Zelensky for the G20 Leaders Summit in September as well. On that note, we're taking a short break, but don't go anywhere. We will be joined by Ambassador K.C. Singh on the India-UK trade talks. Remember, there have been reports that due to pro-Khalistan protests outside the Indian embassy in the UK, there is anger on the Indian side, and the talks have been stalled. However, the Indian government has denied any such development. Let's discuss this further with Ambassador K.C. Singh right after this break. Yeah, Ambassador K.C. Singh, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much, sir. We're just about to begin shortly.
And that's fine.
Welcome back. You are watching News Center. The other big development we have been following is around the India-UK FTA talks. There have been reports in the Times of London that the stocks have been stalled because India is upset as a result of the pro-Khalistan protests that have been taking place outside the Indian embassy in the UK. The Indian government sources have denied any such developments, saying that talks are on and the trade deal is very much on the cards as well. The UK government, the Trade and Business Department of the UK government, has also gone on record to say that the latest round of negotiations on the India-UK FTA were just concluded last month, and both sides remain committed to delivering an ambitious FTA. But how would these protests? Remember, India had summoned the highest-serving diplomat in the UK embassy to the Ministry of External Affairs and asked an explanation for what had happened in the UK right outside the embassy. Let's get in Ambassador K.C. Singh, who's joining us right now. Ambassador Singh, how do you read these statements which are now coming from the UK, from the Indian side, denying any such report that the talks have been stalled? Do you think what happened outside the Indian embassy in the UK, those pro-Khalistani protests that we saw, that may slow down or may derail the trade talks at all?
Look, there are two elements to it. One is the protest that took place, and second is the Khalistanis themselves, that they organized in England and they are able to conduct their propaganda, they're able to incite people in Punjab. Now, there are two different things. The second one, where the group is concerned, I think the Indian concern has been that not only in England, but in Canada, etc., the governments have been rather lax, and they've given a too long a rope to these people who are citizens of those countries, most of them anyway, and yet they carry on this propaganda, which is against the interests of India, the Union of India. Now, that is a long-term thing, and it's an old dispute that we have these countries. The second is immediately, as far as the protest is concerned, I think there was, to say that the protesters overran the High Commission is really hyperbolic, because the Indian High Commission was not, their gates were not breached. It's a balcony outside on which the flag was there, which also, when one individual tried pulling it down, the guards were able to pull it back. So the Indian flag was affected, but the guards were able to retrieve it. But it is true that the British police should have been there. Protesting is one element, freedom of speech. But when you start physically attacking a premise of a foreign mission, that's where the police's responsibility is there to keep them on the other side of the road and not have them come in close proximity to the building where they endanger the building or the staff in any manner. And that surely was not done in this case. Now, considering how India reacted, because we also, according to reports, removed security barricades from outside the British High Commission, as well as High Commissioner's residence in Delhi. If that was done, clearly it was not a one-off. So India was quite agitated. So even though the talks may not be called off, but I would imagine that there would be a degree of slowdown till India is able to get satisfaction on both those issues. On one, I think there have been police deployments now. They brought horses, etc. Or they would be more vigilant in future when they get to know that a protest is about to build up. But at the same time, in today's time and age, with internet, we have seen that the Iranian embassy similarly was besieged some months ago, in sync with the protests taking place in Iran over the women's headgear. So, but there the crowd was much larger. So it's not easy for police force if a very large crowd gathers and then starts attacking, because these cities are very, they don't have that much of police force ostensibly deployed on the streets. You don't see many policemen in England. It's very light policing. It's not that there are people with guns like we see in Delhi, or routes are being blocked off and people with guns hanging around. It doesn't happen in London, etc. Or even in Washington, you don't see it. So that is one element where I think,
Ambassador Singh, do you also believe that, considering that UK would be going to elections, we will be seeing India going to elections next year, there will be pressure on both sides, political compulsions on both sides, which may slow down this deal? Kemi Badenoch, when she was here last year, the UK Trade Minister, had said that she had indicated that there was an internal deadline to conclude these talks by March. That has clearly not happened. But do you think political compulsions on both sides will make reaching a deal this year difficult?
No, on the contrary, because the approach of India has been we are not joining regional groupings. We've not joined RCEP. So we have a preference for bilateral deals. And in case of England having withdrawn from the European Union, they are also desperately looking for new links, because that is the whole rationale of the Brexit approach, that you're not bound by European rules and you will be able to have bilateral deals which favor British business more. And so Britain has not been able to do that. As a result, they are really desperate for having access to large markets, which is really China and India in Asia. And they would be keen to have a deal. So there, I don't think politically it's a subject where there would be opposition to a deal either in India or in England. But yes, in terms of maybe they want the benefit of that, and therefore they want it done earlier, so that if there's an election, they can say, look, we got this deal with India, etc. And that benefits the government having achieved something, because we've had this transition from one prime minister to the other, and the Conservatives are on the back foot. So I don't think that's an issue. But Britain will have to satisfy India on the larger issue of showing greater sensitivity to groups of people who gather or who raise slogans in respect of any state, not just Punjab, which may be against the unity and integrity of India. But here there is a cultural difference, because what is seen as freedom of speech and assembly in the West is not seen progressively as any such freedom in India. So we are much less tolerant to accept this argument. This is part of freedom to assemble or raise slogans. But even Britain has been tightening it up in the last many years. The human rights activists are saying that Britain has tightened up, where they are picking up people who are raising slogans which they find are against Great Britain. So it's a fluid situation, but I think Britain will have to do more.
All right. We've run out of time, but Ambassador Casey Singh, it's always a pleasure to have you on CNBC TV18 explaining us why the UK may want a deal as soon as possible, and how such a deal would be conducive for India as well. But of course, the talks will slow down and are likely to slow down because of the pro-Khalistan protests that took place right outside the embassy in the UK. That's all we have time for on this edition of News Centre. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.